Welcome to the channel, English Epics. Rob, when it was my turn, I approached the cashier's window and handed the girl behind the counter a receipt for the account deposit along with the check. While she was doing what cashiers typically do, I asked her to tell me the current balance in my account. She pressed a few buttons on her computer, looked at the screen, wrote down some numbers on a slip of paper, and slid it over to me across the counter. I glanced at it and handed it back to her. That can't be right. That's only half of what should be there. She looked at her screen again. Yesterday, half of the account balance was withdrawn. Could you please check the balance of my savings account? I asked, and gave her the account number. It was the same situation. Exactly half of what should have been there was missing, and the withdrawal had been made the day before. I stepped away from the cashier's window and headed for the door, when suddenly something else came to mind. I approached the woman we had dealt with when we tried to access our safe deposit box. There were supposed to be 5 certificates in it, but only 3 were inside, and all of Tony's jewelry had disappeared. I cleared out the box and walked out of the bank. I wasn't a fool. Besides me, the only person who had access to the safe deposit box and our accounts was my wife, Tony. The question kept spinning in my head. Why would my wife go to the bank and withdraw half of everything we had? But as I asked myself that question, I already knew the answer. The missing jewelry was the clue. Tony was either planning to leave me or had already left. I took out my cell phone and tried to call her at work, but they told me she had taken the afternoon off to take care of some personal matters. So I headed home, hoping to find some answers there. Her car was in the driveway when I arrived. I parked and walked into the house, but Tony wasn't downstairs. So I went upstairs and walked down the hallway to our bedroom. Tony was on her knees, in front of the dresser, taking things out and packing them into a box. There were several more boxes in the room, and since she obviously hadn't heard me come in, I just stood there for a minute or so, watching her, before finally saying, "Were you planning to leave me a note, or were you just going to disappear?" I saw her tense up and stop what she was doing, but she didn't turn around. After a few very long moments, she said, "I was going to tell you when you got home tonight. Is this because of something I did?" "No, it's not that. Are you leaving me for another man?" Yes and no. Well, that's certainly a clear answer. I'm leaving because of another man, but I'm not leaving for another man. Well, that's even clearer than clear, I said, turning and walking downstairs. 10 minutes later, she came down after me and said, "You seem to be taking this calmly. Honestly, I expected you to be gone by the time I got here." Today I went to the bank to deposit a check, and just imagine my surprise when I discovered that half the money had disappeared from all our accounts. On a sudden impulse, I checked the safe deposit box and saw that all your jewelry was gone. So I figured you were too. That surprised me a little, since I wasn't aware of any problems in our marriage. But they always say the husband is the last to know. There weren't any problems in our marriage, at least not because of you. The problem was entirely mine, and I was planning to tell you about it tonight. I was sure that once I finished, you'd throw me out of the house. That's why I was packing, trying to get as much out as I could before you changed the locks. Come on. Tony.it can't be that bad. Oh yes, it can. But before I tell you what I need to say, I want you to know that I love you, with all my heart and soul. You mean so much to me, and I don't want you to doubt that for even a second. Human nature being what it is, you probably will doubt it. And I can't stop that. But I do love you. I always have, and I always will. I've never doubted that, Tony. Yes, but you didn't know what you're about to find out. Do you remember that Christmas party at Eric's house 3 years ago? How could I forget? It wasn't exactly a highlight of my life. Eric was the owner of the company I work for. The party wasn't truly a cheerful event. Business had slowed down. There had been some layoffs, and everyone knew more were coming. I knew I was going to be cut in the next round, and I felt sorry for myself. I drank too much and blacked out. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and was a little surprised to find myself in my own bed. "I remember it," I said. Little too well, actually. It was after you passed out. Eric told a couple of the guys to carry you to his office and lay you on the couch. I had been drinking too, but nowhere near as much as you. And Eric came up to me and said how sorry he was to be losing someone as talented as you. I didn't understand what he meant at first, because you had never told me how bad things were at the company. So I asked him what he meant, and he told me about the upcoming layoffs. I started to cry. We had just bought a new house and new furniture, And you went out and bought a second car so I could have one to drive. We were up to our ears in debt, but we weren't worried because you had a great job and were earning good money. I had just gotten a job myself, but I wasn't making nearly enough to support us if you lost yours. I told all of that to Eric, and that's when he said it shouldn't have to be that way. I asked him what he meant, and he told me that he had wanted me ever since the first moment he saw me, and that if I slept with him, he wouldn't fire you. I was stunned that he could say something like that to me, a married woman, and I walked away from him, angry and shaken. I had a few more drinks, and then Eric came back and asked if I had thought about his offer. The truth is, I wasn't thinking about that at all. I was thinking about losing the house and everything else we'd worked so hard for, and I started thinking about sleeping with Eric, if that would keep us from losing it all. That's all it would have been, just a quick physical act. It wouldn't have been any different from the sex I had with half a dozen guys before I met you. Every now and then, I'd think back on them all, but those memories of the good times I had with them never affected my love for you. So I didn't think that sex with Eric would affect us either. Eric would have just been sex. You were love. And you would never have known. You were passed out, completely unaware, and neither Eric nor I would have ever told anyone. I told myself that if I did it, I would be doing it for us, to protect our future, but even after thinking it all through, I knew I just couldn't do it. I told Eric I could never betray you like that, and I walked away again. After a couple more drinks, he came back and told me the offer still stood. By then, I had convinced myself that we'd end up in a desperate situation if you lost your job, and I hated the thought of us being poor and homeless. Oh, I know I'm being overly dramatic about the situation, but at that moment, I was nearly out of my mind and couldn't think clearly. I told him he had to promise me that you would never find out, and he promised. And then he took me by the hand and led me to his bedroom. He told me to undress and get ready for him while he went to see the other guests out. Tony. Eric walked into the room and saw me lying on the bed. I knew I was doing this for Rob, not for myself. I closed my eyes while he went about what he came to do, trying to disconnect from the moment. I was determined to endure it but not to get emotionally involved. He came closer. I could feel his touch, but I didn't want it to mean anything. I kept telling myself this was just a transaction, just a way to preserve what Rob and I had, the house, our life, a sense of security. I tried not to react, but with each passing minute, my body betrayed me more and more. I hated myself for it, hated how easy it was to forget why this had started. I held it together, until I didn't. Until I started saying things I didn't want to say. I felt everything slipping out of my control. My reason gave way to emotions, instincts, and desires I never meant to feel. When it was over, I held him as if it were something more than just a compromise, but I knew it wasn't love. It was weakness. I told myself I wouldn't let it happen again. I lied. That night, it happened 3 more times, twice before he helped me take Rob home, and once more on my bed, while Rob, unconscious, lay less than 2 feet away. Eric called me 2 days later. We met at the Hilton, and he was relentless, almost to the point of exhaustion. Since then, I had been seeing him 2 or 3 times a week. Once, when Rob was away on a 5-day fishing trip, I spent 3 days with Eric without leaving the room. I don't love Eric. I'm not even sure I like him. But there's something about the physical connection, something dangerously addictive. It became a craving, and I kept going back for more. Rob, that was 3 years ago, Tony. I never knew, and probably never would have known, if you hadn't told me. Why on earth didn't you just keep it to yourself? Because that's not all. It didn't stop after that first time. I've been seeing Eric 2 or 3 times a week ever since. You've had an ongoing affair with my boss for more than 3 years. Yes. And yet you can still stand here and tell me you love me, that I mean so much to you. I'm sorry, Tony, but that just doesn't make sense. It wasn't about love, Rob. It was about something else. Eric gave me something physical that I couldn't find anywhere else. You know, I used to need something more when you were out of town, but even that never compared. I don't love Eric. In fact, sometimes I can't even stand him. But the way I felt in those moments, it was overpowering. It was purely physical, and as cliché as it sounds, it really was just sex. So why now? Why this confession, when I clearly had no idea? Eric has been pressuring me to leave you and marry him. Apparently, I'm the only woman who's ever been able to satisfy him completely, and he wants me to be a permanent part of his life. I've been telling him no for almost a year. Why? He clearly has what you want, and according to you, what you need. I don't love him. I love you. I enjoy being with him physically, but that's all. I convinced myself I could have the best of both worlds, your love and his ability to satisfy me, and that it would work because you'd never find out. I still don't get it. You were right. I didn't know, and everything was going fine for you. So why tell me now? Because I wanted you to hear it from me, not from him. I owed you that much. Why would I hear it from him? He got tired of me turning down his proposals, so he decided the best way to get what he wants was to tell you the truth, to make you leave me. He believes that once we're divorced, he can take your place, and since you'll be out of the picture, I'll have no reason to say no anymore. So is that what you're going to do? Marry him when the dust settles? No. I don't plan on ever seeing him again. Why not? You'll be free, and he has what you say you crave. I'll never forgive him for tearing us apart. I know it sounds irrational. What I did is what truly destroyed our marriage, but you would have never found out if he hadn't decided to tell you. That, at least from my perspective, makes him responsible for the end of our marriage. I stood up and started to leave the room, but Tony asked, "Where are you going?" "To give you some space. So you can finish packing." I saw a sad expression appear on her face and asked, "What? Did you think I'd just listen to everything you said and then respond with, 'It's okay, Tony, I still love you, and we'll get through this'? A girl can hope." Sorry, Tony, but I'm not built that way. Tony, my heart was breaking as I watched him like that, knowing this was all my fault. He shuffled into the visiting room with handcuffs on his wrists and shackles on his ankles. He paused so the sheriff's deputy could unchain him, then walked over and sat across from me. I tried to lighten the moment with a weak smile. Orange really isn't your color. Not much choice around here. To what do I owe the pleasure of your visit? You're still my husband, Rob, at least until you're released and can speak to a divorce attorney. But even a divorce won't change anything. I know I really messed up when it came to forsaking all others, but "till death do us part" has always stayed with me. I love you to death, baby, and a piece of paper won't change that. I'm here because we need to get our story straight. I could have waited until you were out on bail, but I don't know who you might talk to in the meantime, or what you might say. What do you mean? Clear up our stories. I talked to a lawyer, and he said it would be better for you if you said that. Eric blackmailed me, rather than just attacking him in a fit of jealousy. It wasn't a fit of jealousy. It was just a rather abrupt resignation. I heard that you walked into his office. He stood up, wished you good morning, and you hit him so hard that he flew backwards, hit his head on the wall, and then fell to the floor. Then you said, "Consider me resigned, you fucking asshole," and punched him in the groin half a dozen times. Is that right? No, I punched him in the groin 11 times. They say you unzipped his pants, picked him up, carried him to the table, and then stapled his dignity to the table. That's not true. I tried to staple him to the table, but the staples weren't long enough to go all the way through him. I tried a dozen times, but I couldn't get any of them to go all the way through. What did you tell the police? Nothing. I'm smart enough not to say a word until I have a lawyer. Do you have one yet? No, I called my dad, and he's trying to find one for me. I'll call him and tell him to stop looking. I have an attorney for you. He's in court right now, but he'll be here as soon as he's done. Here's the version we're going with. Eric got me drunk and assaulted me. He told me he recorded it and said that if I didn't keep sleeping with him, he'd make sure everyone I knew saw the footage. Later, he told me you hadn't actually blacked out from drinking. He had drugged you, so you wouldn't get in the way. I gave in because I was terrified of you seeing that recording. Then last week, he told me I'd have to start entertaining some of his clients, and I refused. When he threatened me with the tape again, I told him to go to hell, and then I confessed everything to you. They're going to ask why you were afraid of the assault recording. It would show that you were being forced, because the footage would have been edited. Halfway through, my body started responding, and that's the only part of the video he ever showed. It would be my word against his. You do realize that if he somehow proves otherwise, you could end up here for perjury. It's a risk I have to take. You're here because of me, so I have to do everything I can to get you out. You mentioned bail. I don't have enough money to cover it if it's set to high. The lawyer I hired for you said he thinks he might be able to get you released on your own recognizance, and if not, a bail bondsman will want 10% plus collateral. and you won't get that 10% back. The only thing I have that I can offer as collateral is the house, and you'd have to sign off on it. We're not using a bondsman. I'll post the full amount so I can get it back later. How the hell are you going to do that? I sold the cabin my grandparents left me. That was supposed to be my escape money, to leave town and start over when I got back home. If the bail doesn't exceed $137,000, I can cover it. Why are you going back there? I can't stay here. I can't be this close to you, knowing how you feel about me. I need distance, or I'll lose my mind. Just then, a sheriff's deputy walked in and said our time was up. I stood and rushed out of the room before I had to watch them put the cuffs back on Rob. The timing was a bit off. The lawyer showed up about half an hour after Tony left. He advised me to tell the police only that Tony had confessed to being blackmailed, and that, as I saw it, I had no legal way to go after Eric, so I chose to seek some personal compensation. Instead, I gave the cops a formal statement, and the next morning I was officially charged. Bail was set at $25,000, and Tony posted the money. She gave her version of events to the police, and of course, Eric claimed she was lying. It became a classic case of he said, she said. And then I got lucky. 2 women who had previously worked with me came forward and testified that Eric had pressured them, and when they refused his advances, he fired them. It wasn't much, but it fit Eric's character, and the jury might like that. Then my lawyer told me that his best friend was a reporter at one of the local newspapers, and that his friend was considering writing a piece about sexual harassment in the workplace. He thought it was great that he now had a local company he could focus on for the story, and asked if Tony might be willing to give an interview. Eric's lawyer, my lawyer, and Tony all sat down to discuss it. Tony declined the interview, and suddenly, the charges were dropped. The only real casualties in the whole thing were my job and Eric's dignity. I'll admit, without Tony's help I wouldn't have stood a chance, and I was grateful that she stayed by my side. But that didn't change anything between us. There was absolutely no chance of repairing the damage caused by her 3-year affair. Maybe I could have handled it if she had confessed right after that party. But 3 years? No way. That, and the realization that it would still be going on if Eric hadn't screwed up. I knew I could never trust Tony again after finding out what she had done. Even if she left Eric, how could I ever be sure that if she found herself in a situation where some guy hinted he had something exceptional, she wouldn't go for it? However, what she did for me made it possible for us to stay connected. She didn't go back to her hometown. She bought a 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of the city, and we still see each other from time to time, mostly when she wants sex and calls me. She says there will never be another man in her life, and that she'll wait for me to get over the pain and realize that we're meant to be together. That's never going to happen. I do love her, and I wish I could be with her, but I can't, and won't. Spend the rest of my life wondering whether she's being faithful or not. No matter what she said or did to prove that she was mine and mine alone, the doubt was always there, and I simply couldn't live like that. Thank you for being with us, and if you're one of those who watches silently, just leave a like. It helps new stories come to light.